Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington Realtors legal hotline lawyer. I'm often asked the question of whether or not a buyer is allowed to use a lender different from the lender who wrote the pre-approval letter that was used by the buyer to, at least in part, persuade the seller to accept the buyer's offer. So let's back up a little bit. Buyer makes an offer. Buyer includes a financing contingency. Buyer, in addition to presenting their offer, presents a copy of a pre-approval letter signed by a lender on the letterhead of a particular lending institution. Seller puts all this information together and says, I want to sell to this buyer on these terms, including this financing contingency. And then sometime later, listing broker and seller discover that buyer made timely loan application, but not with the lender represented on the pre-approval letter, but on a different lender, and oftentimes a lender in whom the seller and the listing broker don't have the same degree of trust. So the question is buyer required to get the pre-approval of seller before buyer switches lenders from the lender who wrote the pre-approval letter to any other lender that buyer may choose to use? I'll pause if you want to think about this. The answer is no. So long as buyer makes loan application with any lender consistent with the loan type that buyer has established in the Form 22A, consistent with the down payment that buyer has established in the Form 22A, so long as buyer makes timely loan application with any lender, meaning a loan application within 5 days following mutual acceptance, then buyer is free to choose the lender buyer wants to use, unless seller has imposed some other obligation on buyer. And I will tell you, there is no opportunity in the boilerplate language of our forms for seller to impose another obligation on buyer. So, listing brokers, if it's important to your seller that the buyer make loan application with the lender who wrote the pre-approval letter, or if seller's giving of a financing contingency is conditioned upon buyer pursuing the loan from the lender who wrote the pre-approval letter, then listing brokers, you are going to have to write that language on some page within the purchase and sale agreement, be it Form 34 or a blank space on Form 22D. There is nothing in the forms that obligates buyer to use the lender who wrote the pre-approval letter unless seller and listing broker manually write that provision into the purchase and sale agreement, probably as part of a seller counteroffer. It could be written on the counteroffer form as well. If you have any questions on this topic or any other, please send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington Realtors member.